before I forget, I wanted to mention to those watching by live stream, we probably need to include this in the future announcements lane, is if you're watching by live stream and you would like to have prayer treatment done by our practitioners, there is a link on the website you can go to right on the left-hand side there about prayer treatment, and just click on that, and it can be done via like an email message, and someone will get back to you. So, today we're talking about a consciousness of peace. Peace is something that I think everybody says they want. I never heard anyone say that, they don't want peace. They usually make it conditional, though. They usually say, I want peace, but someone else has to change in order for me to have it. And that may seem like a wise thing to think from time to time, because, there are people that act in ways that are dangerous. There's no question about that. However, being the second one to hate doesn't make you more enlightened. In fact, it maybe makes you less enlightened. Because usually the first one to hate is hating out of ignorance or out of fear. And the second one is reacting out of a sense of primal fear. And I think that it's certainly human to be afraid, but it's also human to transcend some of those more primal kinds of reactive mechanisms. And that's really what becoming civilized, becoming spiritualized is all about. It's overcoming those base, instinctually driven, fear-based reactions and appetites that lead us to destructive behavior. Whether it's fighting with other people, or whether it's abusing our own bodies, or polluting the planet, or whatever it is that we do out of those kinds of consciousnesses that arise from fear. Peace is impossible without a realization of power. See, this is something that people often miss. They think to be peaceful is to be pious and just to be, not bother anybody and just kind of be quiet. But you can't really have peace, peace being a divine quality of knowing that you're in a place of perfect protection, without realizing the power within you. All you can have without the realization of power is a ceasefire. And ceasefires are wonderful, except the very name implies that there'll be another fire coming soon, right? Ceasefires tend to be temporary. Another interesting thing that comes in is the idea of complexity. People often say, I long for the times when the world was more simple. When everything was kind of clear, there were right and wrong was very clear, yes and no was very clear. But I think that misunderstands. The world was never more simple than it is now. We were. Human beings were simplistic in the way we looked at things, and our development is always toward greater complexity, as all evolutionary development is. And as we develop the capacity to think in more complex ways, we see that what we thought was simple was never simple. I was in a conversation, this has been a while back, a couple years ago, and somebody said, well, I remember back in the 1950s when everybody was happy. And I said, which 1950s was that? Was that the 1950s when it was really a joy to be a black American? Was that the 1950s when it was okay, in fact, it was kind of laughed upon to beat your wife? Was that the 1950s when sexual harassment in the workplace was kind of just the norm? Was that the 1950s when we still wouldn't admit we'd interred the Japanese Americans and other Asian-looking people during World War II? See, it seemed very simplistic and very clear and very happy if you were kind of in a little bit of a cocoon and not looking at the whole picture. But as we develop the capacity to see the whole picture, we begin to see that not only were the obvious people being discriminated against, but there was discrimination and fear governing so much of our daily lives, even when we thought we were happy. I thought I was happy. I thought everybody had an alcoholic father. Everybody I knew did. And every now and then there'd be a rage and so forth, and you'd deal with it and then not talk about it. So sometimes the idea of that old simplicity is really we're kind of, what we're missing is our ignorance. The great metaphysician Ronald Reagan said, everybody longs for the outhouse, or longs for the log cabin, but they forget the outhouse. You see. Marianne Williamson said, we cannot give what we do not have. We cannot bring peace to the world if we ourselves are not peaceful. We cannot bring love to the world if we ourselves are not loving. Our true gift to ourselves and others lies not in what we have, but in what we are. If all wars ceased this afternoon, we would still not live in a peaceful planet. Because there are so few of us who are truly peaceful within. Many of us are battling ourselves. We're battling each other. We're battling those with different political ideas, or we're battling those who live in different countries, or we're battling the clerk at the 7-Eleven who never gets to change right. We see life as a battlefield. And we put all of our resources into our Department of Defense, our inner Department of Defense, and we're always on guard, waiting for someone to attack us. Because we think that's the way the world is. I know all of us don't, but some of us do. So to experience peace outside, I have to have it within. Because one thing we learn in this teaching, I hope we learn it, is that nothing can be experienced that isn't within us. I can be unhappy in the midst of a ton of happy people. Or I can be happy in the midst of a ton of unhappy people. Because it's what is within me is how I perceive what everybody else is doing. See, one of the things we do, and we mistakenly do, is we assume everybody sees the world the way we do. Because if they don't, they'd be crazy. Right? So we assume, well, everybody. I think I speak for all Americans when I say, right? You ever hear that? I think I speak for all women when I say, or I think I speak for all ministers when I say, or I think I speak for everyone in this neighborhood. Because we project that out onto other people, and we just assume that we're the most rational person in the room. I assume that I am. Don't you assume that you are? And if someone says something that's outside of your realm of understanding or agreement, you say, well, what's the matter with you? It's hard to be peaceful when we insist that everyone believe what we believe. Matter of fact, it's impossible. Because everybody in here doesn't believe the same thing. Even though you come to the same place of spiritual community, you don't all believe the same thing. I could tell. I'm working on making that okay. But if you walked into any house of worship today on the planet, no two people would have exactly the same set of beliefs about anything. It's just the way it is. And if I can't live with that, I can't be at peace. And if I can't, as Byron Katie says, if you can't love what is, you're in trouble, sweetheart. Because what is. And it doesn't mean that things don't change, but things don't change because I get upset with them. And in fact, when I don't get upset with them, they don't need to change so often. Remember, we defined what a perfectionist is. There's no such thing as a perfectionist. There are imperfectionists. What we call a perfectionist is someone that sees what's wrong first. Like, you see that little dark spot in the corner of that artwork? There's one over there, and there's one over there. See? You know what that is? That's the little power supply box that makes the lights work. And I can't tell you how many people have come up and said, what's that dark spot in the corner of the artwork? I know, Mary's in the back raising her hand. And you know, that one there is a little crooked. I just can't help. It just drives me crazy. I sit here and I can't see anything else but that little dark spot's there and the other one's crooked. By the way, Dr. Jim, I love what you say. I'm just not paying attention because I'm looking at that little box in there. And there's some of you in the front notice there's a little line that comes down here where there's a bad line of pixels in the screen. Some of you now you see it, right? Oh my God. So what we call a perfectionist is someone that sees that first. And I can't enjoy the rest because there's something wrong. Now, it's not to say you don't want to see what's out of place. But when you you just can't help but focus on it, and that's all you see. See, that leads to someone who is not at peace. Being at peace is being able to be okay with the way things are, even as maybe you might make a decision to change it, but you're not making the decision out of being driven crazy. You're making the decision out of, gee, it would be my preference that we be able to set those up without the black box. And trust me, we have worked on it. We had a team of people yesterday spending hours. You'll notice the light around the edges doesn't show anymore. Hi, Linda. I know that was you. Okay. You know, because people just said, you know, this is making us crazy. So I said, well, have at it. Doesn't bother me. Other things bother me, right? So it's not to say that we should never notice what's out of place, but it's noticing how we are when we notice it. You know? Wayne Dyer said, be at peace with everyone. That's good advice, right? That's easy. He lives in Hawaii. But here's the point. He says, no one is capable of making you upset without your consent. So if you begin practicing the intention to be authentic and peaceful with everyone, you connect to peace itself and gain the power to change the energy of your relationships with family and friends. Because, you know, family and friends drive you the craziest, right? Yeah. Be at peace with everyone because you become at peace with yourself. The idea of being authentic. Authentic means the true you, not the you that you think you might be. Because for many of us, the you that we think we might be is based on a current consciousness that's got a lot of fear in it. But the authentic you that is the very center of your being, that is pure and radiant, I call it the precious cosmic self, or the soul, that is untouched by your experience, and that is there radiating outward through your consciousness, but when your consciousness is largely constructed of fearful ideas, that precious cosmic self radiating outward gets diminished as it moves toward the surface. Not in reality, just in terms of what gets realized and what gets acted upon. So if I want peace in the world, in my world, I have to be at peace in myself in a true way, not just pretending to be nice. See, people-pleasing is a way to try to get peace in your life. And I know we don't have any people-pleasers in here, but you may know some. And a people-pleaser is someone who's decided that I'm not the most worthy person in the world, so what I need to do is behave in such a way that I can manipulate others into meeting my needs, or at least into not yelling at me. And that's a way of that's a fearful way of trying to get peace by trying to, it's trying to keep the boat from rocking. And all the energy goes into trying not to make a scene, trying to control your behavior so that you don't do anything to upset anyone else or to drive anyone else to be angry at you. And controls, by the way, is a fantasy. There's no such thing as control within the human being. There's direction. You give yourself direction, but you don't have absolute control because there's too many other factors. You don't even know what your subconscious mind is doing. How can you control it? can direct it. You can direct it. And what you do is, instead of trying to hang on to the boat, is you let the boat go down the river, and as the boat bumps into this shore, you say, okay, I need to make a correction. As it bumps in over here, you make a correction. And you give direction to it. And after a while, you learn to sail that river pretty clearly. But if we think every time we hit the shore or bump into something we're wrong, and we recoil at that, then we don't learn from it, and we just set ourselves up to bump into the next thing as well. We need to lighten up a little with ourselves. You know? We need to be a little more loving with ourselves. If you were trying to train a puppy that you really loved, you know, you wouldn't train it by beating it when it didn't do what you wanted to do. You'd train it very lovingly. You don't want the puppy on the couch, and the puppy jumps on the couch. You say, no, puppy, and you put it back on the floor. And you have to do that about 735 times. And then the puppy begins to think, maybe it's better to be on the floor. The puppy doesn't think, I better not get on the couch, because the puppies don't think that. They're thinking, I guess it's okay here, because when I'm here, nobody picks me up and moves me. But how do you train yourself sometimes to break a bad habit or to do something different? You know, are you harsh with yourself in those regards, rather than being loving but firm? See, like you would be with the puppy. And by the way, if you're not loving and firm with the puppy either becomes fearful or just becomes a badly behaving puppy, and then you have to live with that. Ernest Holmes had a conversation with Albert Einstein once. Boy, to be a fly on that wall. And they had dinner, and they were talking about ideas on science and abstract laws. Ernest shared with Dr. Einstein his views on world peace, saying that permanent world peace is not an illusion, but a potential possibility and an evolutionary imperative, and science will aid in that evolution. He heard from Dr. Einstein many illustrations about principles which affirm that good ultimately must vindicate itself. Give them time, and physicists and metaphysicists will use the same textbook, said Einstein. Give them time. The idea that peace can only come through a spiritual approach, or peace can only come through a non-spiritual or a materialistic approach, each approach cuts off part of our strength, cuts off part of our capacity to express who we are as human beings. We have a spiritual nature. Now, some of the world religions haven't done the best job of encouraging the peaceful aspects of that spiritual nature. You know, the word Islam means peace. And the people that are Islamic, that don't practice peace, are violating their religious principles. I hope you know that. And Christianity was about building a more peaceful approach than the Old Testament kind of approach that came out of a more limited consciousness. The beautiful song that Cassandra sang at the beginning about lead me to the cross, leading me to your heart. The cross stands for, metaphorically, the vertical and the horizontal, the earthly and materialistic this way, and the spiritual. It's a true crossing of the aspects of human nature. That we are both spirit and matter, and that we have to use both kinds of intelligence to move forward in our lives, individually and collectively. That's what the great religions all say. There's no disagreement there about the basic philosophy. The disagreement comes in, how do we get there? And it's not even that. We don't even disagree about what we want and how to get there. We disagree because we haven't learned to deal with our own inner demons. And they show up and we say, well, I feel that way. I feel strongly. I'm going to make my religion sound like this. So we go on a crusade, or the modern term, jihad. The meaning jihad is the inner battle that every good Muslim does with his or her own inner demons. That's a jihad, the seeking of inner truth. And when it's used in an external way against other people, it's a violation of Islamic principles. Just like murder is a violation of Christian principles, although it's often used in the name of Christianity. So our problem is not what our religions say. Our problem is that we try to interpret them through our own emotional lens and our own anger and our own fear, and then we project that out into the world. And we hate one another, which is exactly the opposite of what every religious teaching says to do. So where do we go from here? Well, I would say that if you realize that and you agree that all that's true, you only have one choice. That's to come to terms with it in your own self and make that okay. Because there isn't much you can do about it. Except find peace in your own heart. And not condemn those that don't live up to your lofty standards, if they are lofty. And find a way to say, the God in me sees the God in you, and we have to learn to converse. And if I can converse from the best part of me to you, something in you might awaken, might respond, and might be called forth. And if it isn't, I did my best. So I hold myself harmless. Am I contributing to the problem and making it worse because I feel justified in hating someone that hates me first? Or judging someone that I think has judged me first? Or calling a whole group of people savages or whatever we do, or they get called worse, right? If you want a lesson, go on any internet news site with articles about Syria and read the comments after the news article in those sites that don't edit comments. And you'll hear some of the most vile hatred you can imagine coming from Americans who probably are sitting in church today professing their love of God. That's all right. I don't say that to make them wrong. I just say we all have been wrong, haven't we? Unknowingly or knowingly, we've all been ignorant. We've all smacked the puppy before we learned that's not what you do. We've all felt wounded and attacked, and we've responded in kind sometimes, or we've curled up in a ball and become afraid. Harry Stein said, people at peace with themselves simply don't act cruelly toward others. Anyone that is harming anyone else is by definition, by reality, not at peace with themselves. How do you become not at peace with yourself? You get wounded. You get wounded by things people say or things people do. You get wounded by seeing injustice after injustice after injustice that doesn't get rectified. You get wounded by sitting around the water cooler at work talking about wounds or refusing to look at your own wounds and projecting the anger onto other people. We all do it. To one degree or another. It's not a matter of do we do it or not. It's a matter of what degree we do it. No one is completely innocent on this planet. And our crimes may not be fully intentional, but they're crimes nevertheless. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. Can't unring a bell, right? Can't take it back. You can say, I'm sorry. You know, if I walked up and punched Rick in the nose right now, and I stood back, oh, sorry, Rick. Would that make it all better? No. See? But if I thought about it, and no matter how angry I might be at Rick right now, and I said, boy, wouldn't it be stupid to walk up and punch him in the nose? What would that say about me? I need to do my inner work and heal what's within me. And that has nothing to do with what he's done or hasn't done. And you haven't done anything, by the way, that I know of. But see, when I recognize, when I identify someone as being my person that's wounded me, the power I give them in my own mind and the power I take away from myself, Carl Jung said, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. You're not here to do anything other than bring a greater degree of light than existed when you showed up. How do you do that? By being that light, by knowing you are that light, by knowing you have the capacity to love, by knowing you have the capacity to be kind, to be compassionate, and that capacity should not be taken away from you because others act in a different way. We disempower ourselves so quickly. Well, he insulted me, so I let him have it. And there's a lot, and you'll probably get a lot of support in that kind of an approach. You know, you can go through life as one big argument. The world will argue back with you. But what we don't often realize is you can go through life as one big love affair, and the world will just love you back. It's not determined by what's out here, it's determined by what I bring to what's out here. My own experience is not determined by anyone but me. To understand that and to live that requires a tremendous acceptance of the power that you are. And then when you accept that power and recognize that that power is always love, then you can be at peace. Then you can be at peace. Until then, and as long as I don't get that, as long as I don't recognize my inner power, I can never be at peace because something more powerful is always going to be coming down the road. And I have to learn how to deal with that power. I have to bow to it. I have to avoid it. I have to run and hide from it. I have to stand up to it. What do I have to do today? It's exhausting. Joseph Campbell said, "We cannot cure the world of sorrows, but we can learn to live in joy." And what he meant by that was that the world is the world. The world is a developing process. Developing processes are messy. If the world were suddenly perfect, everything would freeze, because out of perfection you can make nothing new. Everything would just stop. But as long as we're in form and we're in motion, we're imperfect in the sense of we have room to become. And that's the promise, see? I was listening to a wonderful lesson by Father Thomas Keating. I talked about it a little bit last week, but he talked about the idea of original sin from a Christian perspective. He said, from a Christian contemplative perspective, original sin is simply the human condition of not knowing how magnificent you are. And thinking that the world around you has power over you when it doesn't. And the overcoming of original sin through grace is the realization that Spirit, that God, can only express by means of you, not at you. And what did Ernest Holmes said? Spirit can only do for you what it can do through you. So am I a clear vessel for the expression of love? Am I a clear vessel for the expression of joy and compassion? Or have I do I have a lot of clogged arteries? Do I have psychosclerosis, which is a hardening of the attitudes? Do I think that if I hate in response to someone else's hatred, that I'm more enlightened than they are? If I do, I suffer. And when I suffer, that's the universe letting me know that I need to make an adjustment, or it just gets worse. You know, when the check engine light comes on, you can put a piece of black tape over it and pretend everything's okay, but then you'll decide to drive to Vegas and be out on the 15 or something, and all of a sudden, chug, chug, chug to the side of the road. And you say, oh man, all the luck. And you can call Click and Clack, the Car Talk guys, and say, listen, here's what happened. They're going to say, is your check engine light on? I don't know. Let me take the tape off and see if it's still lit. Yeah, it's still lit. Well, then you're a dummy. Right? We are. When we don't pay attention to the signals, we're dumb. When we don't listen to our body, the body is the storehouse of your emotional wisdom. When your body is telling you that something's wrong, listen. When your emotion, when your heart is saying, this isn't right, listen. You have a true compass within you, a true gyroscope, in fact, that is perfectly designed to carry you through this incarnation, expressing the best of yourself. And that can only happen through a heart that is at peace, by realizing its own magnificence. So when we play a little game around here, somebody says, I'm sorry, I say, you're not sorry, you're magnificent beyond measure. But you can apologize. If I say I'm sorry, I'm affirming that I'm less than I am. If you think about it, words are important. Your subconscious understands the meaning of these words that you say to yourself and others. But I can apologize from strength. I can't say I'm sorry from strength. I say I'm sorry, I've diminished myself. What if we had a little socially accepted behavior that said, instead of saying I'm sorry, you said, from the strength of my inner heart of love, I apologize to you for any harm I may have done. Let me make reparations if that's appropriate. What if that was okay? You know? When I was a police lieutenant, one of my officers did a dumbass thing. They did them all the time. and just, abuse somebody's rights. And they were of a type of person that would make a complaint. So the complaint came in, and I was sent to meet with the citizen, and the citizen wanted the officer to apologize. And the officer really wasn't sorry. The officer was sorry that he got in trouble, but he wasn't sorry he did what he did. And he told me he'd do it again. And I said to the person, I think, if the officer did tell you he was sorry, he wouldn't mean it. That's okay, I still want him to say it. He should have to bow down and apologize. And I said, well, I apologize to you, but I'm not making my officer bow down to anyone. So then I got a complaint against me. So I went to see the captain. And the captain says, can't you just apologize? I said, no. I said, I explained to the person it would be meaningless, and they want a meaningless apology. And I said, I don't think there's any, I don't see any, I looked through the policy book, there's nothing in there that says we have to give a meaningless apology. He says, okay, we can add that next year. But in the meantime, he says, it would take a lot off of my back if you would just apologize and the person would shut up. I said, how about I just tell him to shut up? We'll eliminate the middleman. Well, I got transferred. It's true. And I didn't apologize. And there was a little thing in my record, my permanent record, that's a little reprimand. That's all right. It's all right. Give me the reprimand. If I got a reprimand every time I was inauthentic, boy, wouldn't that be valuable? Right? Don't sell out. Don't sell out your core values. Stand strong in who you are and the strength that you are, and you will be at peace even if the world is in chaos around you. Because that's the way it works. You can't join the chaos unless you feel part of it. And out of chaos comes creation. Thank you, and namaste.